Welcome back to Box Office Maniacs. Today I'm doing something totally different, something I've never done before. I'm not getting on here to talk about movies or review movies or anything like that. I'm actually getting on here to talk to you about writing. For those who don't know, I am a writer and I have published 5 books now. By published, I mean I pretty much have self-published them. I'm not going to bore you with a backstory of my writing, but to tell you very briefly that I've been pretty much writing since I could hold a pencil. And I've written so many different short stories and novels and everything, but I've never published anything. It was one of those things that where you're like, okay, I gotta fix this because the publisher ain't gonna like it. I gotta fix this. This isn't right. The story's not right. Character, and you just go back and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. And I've worked on things years, literally years, that have never seen the light of day. So this happened about 3 or 4 years ago. We were sitting in McDonald's, my wife and I, and then she finally just told me, well, why don't you self-publish something on Amazon? And I thought that was sort of a cop-out. I'm like, that's not real publishing. I mean, really, what do I know? Of course, now I know it's real publishing. In fact, I think it's one of the most purest forms of publishing you can get right now. Because people who are writing these novels don't have a gigantic company backing them up. So you might make mistakes, you might have spelling errors, you may not have perfect sentence structure, but that's what comes from self-publishing something. But I really think the fear came from to have somebody actually read something that I've done. So basically, at that McDonald's is where I decided, okay, if I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it for real, it's time to do it. And that's what I did. So my first novel that I wrote was called Karna the Cathorian. And if you've read any of my books, you know that I really like a strong female lead, or a great female action hero, which is kind of what I wanted to create with the Karna series. And when I started writing this, I was working at a place that I hated. I despised it. And I was in a pretty dark place when I started that book. I was always angry, mostly because of that job. And I felt like I was literally a prisoner or a slave to that job, and they were torturing me every day. Every day I went in there, I started getting to a deeper and darker place. So basically what I did was take all those feelings and put them into this book, which is why Karna is such a dark and violent book. I mean, yeah, I like horror movies, I like action films, so I kind of took all that and put it in there, plus all the feelings that I was feeling at the time, and that's really why it turned out the way it did. So here's the cover of it. And basically, it's sort of a Conan type of story, but with a female lead. Like I said, I really like female action heroes, and I don't think they've really gotten their due yet. So that's kind of what I wanted to create, was sort of an over-the-top, in sort of the sword and sorcery type of environment. And the amazing voice talent of Jackie Hern actually read the first chapter of this, and I will put it into the link below with all the links to where you can purchase my books as well, of course, if you wanted just to go and listen to the first chapter of Karna. Basically, the story of Karna is she finds out she's from a tribe of super strong warriors that once existed that have now pretty much vanished or have been killed off. So very early in the book, her village gets attacked and she ends up getting kidnapped and is taken off to become a slave. I don't want to give away too much of the plot here, but it is, like I said, extremely violent. Lots of sexual situations going on, so it's not for kids. And the one thing that it taught me how to do was sort of create the structure of a novel. I've written many things, like I said, before this, but this was the first time that I was like, okay, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the ending. And I knew exactly where the book was going. The entire time I worked on this, it was like therapy. Literally, it was like therapy up at work, because I was putting all my anger and rage into this book. And I did feel so much better when I was finished with it. And then it came around to publishing. Now, you talk about being nervous. I was like, someone's actually going to read this? Someone's going to read what I've written? So I finally put it out there. I mean, that's the thing with writers. A lot of them are just afraid to have people read something. But unless you do it, you can't improve on what you're doing. And you don't know if you're doing something that people will even enjoy because you're too afraid to do it. There is no going around in a circle. Just publish it. And don't wait for a big publishing company to come looking for you, because it's never going to happen. Get your stuff out there. And then maybe a big publishing company will find you and then publish your stuff in paperback or hardcover at the store. Hasn't happened to me yet, but it could, hopefully. So after publishing Karna, I was getting a lot of really positive feedback, and I think it surprised me mostly because of what the story was and how dark and violent it was, but people really seemed to enjoy it. And also sort of the context of the story itself and who Karna was and what she's becoming later in the book, and people really enjoyed that. And that surprised me. I gotta tell you, that really surprised me. So right after that, I was planning on writing a sequel to Karna. I was going to have it a trilogy, a 3-book trilogy. But then I kind of got sidetracked. Right around then, the Twilight movies came out. And I was so furious and so angry with the Twilight films. Because it's like, okay, you're taking a incredible monster of a vampire and you're turning it into a teenage love story that has nothing to do with the original concept of a vampire. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to write my own Twilight book and actually bring a real vampire into this world. So I literally spent the next year and a half working on this book, and it just kind of fell apart. The whole book just kind of, I don't know, it wasn't working, the story wasn't working. So after all this time, even though I finished the book, I didn't like it, so I never published it. So right after that, it was New Year's Day. I got up, turned the TV on, and there was a news story about this school teacher. And she was saying that she got laid off from school. She had like 10 kids and a mortgage, and her husband wasn't working or whatever. So she decided to write a romance novel, and it paid off her mortgage. She bought a brand new house, got all this money, became famous. And I'm like, okay, and we were really struggling for money at that point. And I always like challenges. I always like trying to challenge myself to something that I would not normally do. And writing a romance novel is about the biggest challenge I can think of. So I set forward to do this, but then I decided, I'm going to have some fun with this. So I started writing this. It's not even romance. It's more erotica. It's very erotica. I decided if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it kind of as a serial, where I'm going to bring out 50 pages of the book and have a sort of a cliffhanger. Come out with another 50 pages the next month and the next month. It was a blast. I had so much fun doing this. And at first, I started writing it as a bad romance story. And I didn't think I would have as much fun doing that as I actually did. And this ended up becoming what's called the Devil Saga. Of course, I couldn't just write a erotica book. It had to be sort of a supernatural erotica. Just me writing an erotica book wouldn't be that exciting. At least not to me anyway. So I came up with a story about this woman, and her father's a preacher, and she's about to get married in like 3 months. And she's going to school, and on the side, she's a stripper to pay for her way through college. But nobody knows she's a stripper, obviously. So the book starts out, and she meets up with this guy. She falls down the steps, a guy catches her. She kind of like instantly sees him and falls madly in love with this guy. So through the first 50 pages of the book, she ends up really just obsessing over this guy, until she finds out that this guy is actually Satan. And then becomes the question of, okay, if you meet the perfect person, either male or female, and they can give you anything you ever wanted, and you could be happy living with this person the rest of your life, but you find out that they're the devil, would you still stay in the relationship? And that concept really got me going. So by the time I hit the second book and the third book, I was really enjoying the story and these characters. So by the time I finished it, I was really actually sad to finish the novel because I had so much fun writing these. So after a while, I ended up just putting all 3 novels into one collection, which is called The Devil Saga. The Devil Saga I wrote under a pen name of Felicity Fine, because I figured it was written in a female perspective, and if they had a guy's name on there, readers may not associate it as much as a woman writing the book. So I pretended to be a woman when I wrote the book, is what I'm saying. So after this, I was going to go back to Karna finally. And I started writing Karna until one day I was looking at some of my older books I had written. Like I told you, I had written so much stuff in the past. And I found this one book that I had still on my laptop. I had written it like 11 years ago. And again, not really knowing how to create a continuing story, it unraveled, sort of like my other book, my vampire werewolf book that I was working on. But then when I was reading through it, I could kind of see where the story started going off the rails, because there was so much going on, and I had like 5 different storylines going on, and different plots and too many people, and so I pretty much had to streamline the book. And that ended up becoming a book that I just published not too long ago called The Last Breath. And it's a Harry Moon novel, which, if you like monsters, if you like detective stories, if you like action, I mean, this is what this book is. It takes place here in St. Louis, so I didn't get to create my own mythical world like I did in Karna, so I kind of had to stay in somewhat reality with this one. But I also wanted to make it a fun action-adventure, like Karna, but more sort of like Raiders of the Lost Ark meets Casablanca meets Nightbreed. And then I realized halfway through this book that there's almost no humans at all in the book. It's a lot of monsters. It was a tough book to work on. And so far, it was the longest book that I worked on. So right after I finished that, I decided to look up my vampire werewolf book again. That's something that's always bothered me, never to have published that. So I started reading it, and I was like, wow, this is actually not bad. Again, until it gets towards the middle and in the end, and then again, the book was unraveling. So while I was working on it, I realized that a lot of stuff that was in this book, I had put in the previous book that I just published. So I thought to myself, wow, this would be really cool if I could use this book as sort of a prequel to the book I just wrote. And that's what this is. This is a prequel to The Last Breath. And this book is called Under the Hunter's Moon, which I am still currently working on right now. And it basically is going to tell the tale of how the vampires and the werewolves that exist in the Harry Moon universe that is in, The Last Breath, how they were created in this book. And although none of the characters that are in the previous book are in this one, these are all new characters, but the world it takes place in is the same world that the Harry Moon book takes place in. So in the Last Breath, you got to see all the monsters and how they lived. And in this one, you actually get to see all the humans and how they live in the same world. So I'm putting away 2 hours every day, starting today, to get this book done. And I'm really excited about this book. It's probably going to be the longest book I've written so far. So I hope you liked my rambling here and didn't bore you too much. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say, and hopefully you will enjoy the stuff if you read it. And if you don't read it, please tell somebody else if you think someone else is interested in an action-adventure book or a monster detective novel or erotica. Let them know. Say, hey, I know this guy who wrote these books and you might want to check them out. Thanks a lot for listening.